If you hear a knock at the door and open it to find no one there, what would you do? Alright, let's begin today's story. Q was a security guard working the night shift one winter. Around 1 a.m., he was dozing in the security booth when the phone rang. It was a resident saying someone was lightly knocking on their door continuously. The resident had asked who it was, but there was no response. Through the door, faint sobbing could be heard. The hallway lights were motion activated, so looking through the peephole, nothing could be seen. Plus, it being so late, the confused resident didn't dare open the door and called the property management office instead. Q immediately felt something was off. The first floor had access control, so whoever could knock directly must be a neighbor. Could the resident be feuding with a neighbor who was deliberately messing with them? In any case, it couldn't be ignored. Q told the resident he was on his way. He notified his colleague of the situation and had him monitor the surveillance, then headed over himself with a flashlight and baton. Q went straight to the resident's unit and knocked for nearly 3 minutes without answer. Puzzled, he wondered if the resident was just messing around with nothing better to do. Just then, his walkie-talkie crackled. His colleague said the resident had called again, reporting that someone had just knocked softly on her door again, accompanied by sobbing. Q was baffled. He double-checked the room number, correct. But he had just been knocking, and no one else was in the hallway, let alone any sobbing, which he definitely hadn't heard. The resident claimed she had spoken through the door. Q grew uneasy but tried again, knocking and calling out that he was security and was anyone home. After tiring himself out knocking and shouting without the door opening, Q had his colleague contact the resident and ask her to open up. Through the walkie-talkie, he heard his colleague finish saying, "Please open the door, my colleague is already outside." The door opened. The resident was a woman around 30 years old, wearing clothes and looking unwell, clearly frightened. Upon letting Q inside, she asked why he had come so late. Q responded that he had been banging on her door but she didn't open, yet she complained about his late arrival. The resident firmly denied hearing any knocking or shouts from Q. As they discussed what transpired, terror and disbelief were apparent in each other's eyes. Q had his colleague pull up surveillance footage of the unit's door to check the earlier recording. It showed only Q appearing there over the 10+ minutes from when he left the security booth. After seeing the footage, the resident felt the situation was too bizarre, wondering if it was some prank. Q also leaned toward a prank and prepared to return to the security booth. But just as he went to open the door and leave, knocking sounded again, accompanied by sobbing, except Q didn't open it right away. Peering through the peephole, strangely, though knocks were audible, the sensor light didn't activate, so he couldn't see anything. He radioed his colleague to check the camera for who was outside. But the walkie-talkie seemed interfered with, cutting in and out with a voice saying, "Open the door, open quickly." Q broke out in a cold sweat, while the resident grabbed his arm in fright. It was a woman's voice. The knocking soon ceased and the walkie-talkie returned to normal. Q contacted his colleague again, asking if anyone had been outside. His colleague said the camera showed no one by the door just then. Q also asked if he had heard a woman's voice on the radio, but his colleague said no. With things happening so suddenly, Q had no time to think. He decided to stay and watch over the resident's home that night, ready to charge out and grab anyone if knocking recurred. The resident agreed. Q and his colleague took shifts, one monitoring the cameras, the other waiting by the door for more knocking. Time passed quickly, and before they knew it, it was morning. With no further strange occurrences throughout the night, Q's tense nerves relaxed and he returned to the security booth. Reviewing the night's footage showed nothing unusual. But why hadn't the resident heard his earlier knocking? And how had they both heard the bizarre knocking and sobbing? And the woman's voice on the radio? There were no scientific explanations. He could only attribute it to a supernatural experience. Fortunately, nothing similar happened again afterward. The story ends here. I've heard many bizarre tales that often end abruptly, mysteriously appearing and disappearing. If you have other perspectives on this story, please discuss in the comments. See you next time.